So hello and welcome everybody. A special welcome to the Special Rapporteur on safe drinking water and sanitation, Pedro Arrojo Agudo, who will be providing a comment at the start of the roundtable discussion in the second half of this webinar. Thank you, Pedro, for joining us. Welcome also to the water and sanitation service providers who've kindly agreed to join us in follow-up to a workshop last week on business and human rights, which was used to introduce a business tool to check compliance with the human rights to water and sanitation, which we'll be sharing with you today. Many thanks and welcome to Cristina Alejandro, the Senior Vice President from the Bago Waterworks in the Philippines, which is a privately owned provincial water service utility, to Srija Santosh, Head of Sustainability from Aram Scientific Solutions in India, which supports micro-enterprises for public service toilet facilities in Odisha and Kerala, to Farhana Rashid, who runs a social enterprise in Bangladesh called Bulmijo to provide hygienic public toilets, and Prakash Amatya, who's director at the Aerosan social enterprise in Nepal, providing a social public toilet model with biogas production. We also welcome Neil Dott as Executive Director of ACOFED, the Federation for Private Water Providers, and Alex Nezevich from who's the Executive Director from the Toilet Board Coalition, both to join the discussion at the end. Our topic today is business and human rights. Businesses have a duty and a responsibility to protect, respect, and fulfill human rights. It's not just a duty, but in many cases, it's also good business sense to take care of your customers and to ensure that no one is left behind. My colleague, Gabriela Casanova, is going to give you an introduction to the human rights to water and sanitation and a business checklist tool that we've developed for small-scale private providers to use. We've added the link to the checklist in the chat box, or we will be in a minute, for reference. It's on our website and you're very welcome to use it, reference it, or have a look at it while we're talking, or in future. We also encourage you to ask questions through the chat as we go along, and we'll do our best to respond during the session, either through the chat box or when we have our questions and answer sections. So that leads me to introduce you to Gabby, who is going to give you an overview of the basic idea behind the human rights to water and sanitation, followed by an introduction to our checklist. And we'll be waiting to ask for examples from our panelists as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Let me just share my screen. So I will start by introducing the human rights to water and sanitation, just briefly, a history overview. Over the last 18 years, the human rights to water and sanitation have developed from the definition outlined in the now famous General Comment 15 and adoption of the Committee on Economic and Cultural Rights in 2002, through a series of resolutions at the UN General Assembly and Human Rights Council in 2010 and 2015, there has been an increasing clarity over the meaning and interpretation of these rights. And as with human rights, states also made a commitment to achieve the SDG targets over a reasonable time in the agenda by the year 2030. The SDG targets on water and sanitation, SDG 6.1 and 6.2, clarify these human rights in terms of simple targets and goals for states to achieve. There are two sides to the human rights to water and sanitation, a normative and procedural content. The normative content provides the so-called ilities and more quantitative aspects, while the procedural side incorporates the human rights-based approach, which can apply to any right. So starting with the normative content, it determines that the human rights to water entitles everyone to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water for personal and domestic use. And the human rights to sanitation entitles everyone to have physical and affordable access to sanitation in all spheres of life, and that is safe, hygienic, secure, and social and culturally accessible, and that provides privacy and dignity. And prior to the establishment of the SDG target indicators, the reference for these standards are included in General Comment 15 and also in the WHO drinking water standards. The most challenging part of fully realizing the human rights to water and sanitation is the implementation process. This is where the procedural principles come in. A human rights-based approach is essential to ensure that water and sanitation facilities are available to all on a non-discriminatory basis. Priority must also be given to the most marginalized and vulnerable people. The key principle here is participation of the local community, inclusive of women and representatives from different vulnerable and marginalized groups. Participation must be meaningful, be part of the decision-making process, and serve to be inclusive. One aspect that will help with participation is access to information, which is often not made available in a format that can be read or accessed by people in their local languages, for example, or for zones without internet or people without the ability to read. Ultimately, states need to be accountable for non-discrimination. If an inclusive and participative process is followed, the results should be more sustainable with the support of all kinds of stakeholders and helpful to the environment. Now focusing on SDG 6, it captures most of the criteria of the human rights to water and sanitation and also some of the principles of the human rights-based approach. By definition, the SDGs are goals or targets, and they are oversimplified to provide quantifiable and monitoring standards to encourage states to achieve measurable outcomes towards the goals. And now the guiding principles on business and human rights. The UN Human Rights Council in 2011 endorsed the guiding principles on business and human rights, implementing the UN Protect, Respect, and Remedy framework. These guiding principles apply to all states and business enterprises like NGOs and community-based organizations, regardless of size, sector, location, or ownership structure. And this is where our checklists come in. The objective is to provide a self-assessment tool based on human rights for informal providers and entrepreneurs delivering services in the water and sanitation sectors. So now I will show you the checklist. Let me just change the screen. And you can access these online. I will base the presentation on the water checklist, but we also have one dedicated to sanitation. And feel free to send any questions on the chat that we'll try to answer them. So starting with availability. Availability means water must be available in sufficient quantities for personal and domestic use. And the WHO estimates that 50 to 100 liters per person per day is an adequate amount. And here we have questions that you can assess your business with. So for example, is there a strategy to respond to water shortages? And do facilities have regular opening hours? Following these questions, we also provide examples on implementation, so how you can actually improve your business to achieve the human rights to water and sanitation. So for example, you should check national regulations to ensure that requirements are met and partner with local authorities and NGO and other service providers. Quality is a very complex criteria, and it means that water must be safe for consumption and not threaten human health. And the WHO has established quality standards to serve as a guide for states. Questions that could be asked are staff able to conduct quality checks? Is the water provided tested on a regular basis? Or does the business have an efficient maintenance system? And examples to improve implementation could be make sure that the storage equipment is always clean and train the staff to have regular quality checking. And of course, these will be different for sanitation. Following, we have acceptability, which means that water and sanitation facilities must be culturally and socially acceptable. For water, it means that it should be acceptable in terms of color, odor, and taste. And for sanitation, it means that facilities must ensure privacy and have culturally acceptable design. And questions that could be asked are, is the water provided well accepted by clients? So gathering clients' opinion is very relevant in this point. And do I enable feedback from clients as to their satisfaction with taste and odor? Examples for implementation could be have participatory discussions with the community and ask clients and community members what is acceptable to them. Now we will have a brief discussion with our panelists.
Yeah, hello, I'm going to step back in here. Thank you, Kevin. We're going to try and make this a little bit more interesting by structuring it with questions to the service providers to get examples for how they are doing things so that it is a little bit more meaningful, and also they can explain to you some of the challenges that they've had and ways they've got around that. So I've got a first question here for Christina Alejandro from Balibago Waterworks in Philippines. And we'd like to ask you to describe methods that your organization uses to ensure wastewater treatment and drinking water are available on a continuous basis, even in emergency situations. Thank you, Chriselle.
Do I make my presentation now, or I just give it?
Yes, please. Yeah.
I can make my presentation. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you all see? Can you see my screen?
Yes, please. Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Chriselle Panlilio Alejandro, Senior Vice President of Balibago Waterworks, a private water utility operating in the Philippines. Thank you very much to the organizing committee and AquaFed for inviting me to speak about ensuring availability in the water supply. In the Philippines today, only 87% of Filipinos have access to safe water supply, while only 74% have access to sanitation. The Philippine government admits that the water and sanitation sector has a myriad of challenges before it can fulfill its obligation to assure every Filipino has adequate and affordable water and sanitation. The government views private operators as partners in closing the gap between those who have access and those who do not. There are 1,779 privately owned and managed water utilities in the country. In the recently released Philippine Water Supply and Sanitation Roadmap, the National Economic Development Authority, or NEDA, cited that local government-run water utilities typically encountered technical and management challenges related to operations. Among these challenges are only 19 hours of water availability per day, production is not measured, and 79% of LGUs in the study do not conduct water potability tests. Meanwhile, NEDA cited in the same publication that private utilities generally operate more efficiently than most LGU-run water utilities. Introducing our company, Balibago Waterworks is a 64-year-old private utility that currently operates 75 small to medium municipal franchises all over the Philippines. Our credo or promise to our customers is to provide them water availability 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, water pressure of at least 16 psi during peak hours, and water quality passing Philippine national standards for drinking water. And of course, providing the best quality service to our customers. How do we ensure availability? The benchmark for us is that our water supply should achieve 120% to 150% of the maximum day demand for each of our franchise areas. Annually, we invest in developing new water sources to keep up with population growth. Further, bulk water sources are acquired if necessary. Expanding the pipe network is also critical to ensuring availability, as well as keeping non-revenue water to minimal levels, because higher water losses lead to less availability. Our average monthly consumption per household is 22 cubic meters, which translate to roughly 146 liters per capita per day. This is testament that each household is able to get a sufficient amount of water supply for their daily needs. Our audit team conducts customer satisfaction surveys at least once a year per franchise, and the criteria includes quality, water pressure, availability, and price per cubic meter, amongst other things. How do we ensure availability during emergencies? Well, first of all, generator sets are installed in each pumping station for use during power outages, which are frequent in the Philippines, or natural disasters. Lorry trucks are also available and deployed when distribution networks are damaged or cut off from water sources. This picture was taken when the Taal volcano erupted in the Philippines, and the two towns that were most impacted were towns that we were servicing. Lastly, we ensure availability by having an interconnected distribution network. Our franchises nearby supply water to neighboring franchises whose water service is affected. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chriselle. That was very helpful, actually, in terms of, I particularly like the ways that you're managing problems during emergencies, because it keeps the continuity of supply. I'd also like to maybe ask a question. We'll have more chances for questions later, so I'm going to move on to the next presentation, if that's okay.
Sure.
Srija Santosh from Aram Scientific Solutions in India to talk to us about acceptability and some of the challenges you've had with water purification and the need for cultural acceptance in the area that you're working. So Srija, would you like to?
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone here. My name is Srija Santosh, and I'm working as head of sustainability with Aram Scientific Solutions. It's a company which is basically operating in the wash sector, that is sanitation sector, for the past 10 years. And we are focusing on bringing innovation and technology in public toilets and waste management solution. And we work with international universities in bringing such innovations which are eco-friendly and which are sustainable. So as Ms. Amanda had asked me regarding how acceptable the recycled water is, through what we have generated through our systems. So here I want to give you our experiences with working with two such solutions. One is the Caltex system, and the other is called NRBR system. which we have productized with USF and Caltech, and it's in a pilot phase, nearly 2 years since we have started it. So through our journey through these systems, which very successfully recycles the waste which is coming out of the two public units, which are toilet units, which are connected to the waste management solutions here. And through the constant monitoring and all the evaluations that we have brought out, we know that the output, that is the wastewater, is potable. That means the quality of the water which is coming out of the resultant water which is treated, which is coming out, is 100% or 98 to 99% drinking water quality. And this is the water which we recycle back to our public toilets, and we use it for flushing and cleaning purpose. So during our experiences where we have installed these two systems, one is in a school where children numbering to around 100 to 150 numbers use the unit, and another we had installed in a medical college, and it has per day usage is around 50 or so. So what we have noticed is that that initially there were some hiccups, because as I told you, it's recycled water, and we had to do a lot of programs and a lot of awareness creation, and also taking workshops and bringing the community where these were installed, especially giving presentations and awareness drive to show that and being transparent about the usage of water in our system. Gradually we have seen that it has been accepted by the community there. People have accepted it by ensuring that we have been transparent in every way, showing with our signages and messages that we put up inside and outside our toilet regarding the quality of water which is used specifically only for flushing and cleaning of the units. And we also ensure to make them understand that the water which is coming from for hand washing purpose or the health faucet, where there is contact with a person, it is coming from the city connection, and that these are all different completely entirely different independent plumbing system that is used in the respective water systems for storage also, and for usage inside the toilet. So all this being very transparent with them, being very open with them, with all the data that we have put up on the the toilet, wherever they are, on the panels, the messages are put up. We were able to have the acceptance and appreciation from the community where these two units have been installed. And it's actually, in the end, what I find is that if there is any way of conserving this such a precious resource, community will definitely participate in it and go ahead with you, provided you ensure that you know that this what we are providing them is according to the quality and standards, and we show them that data that what is specifically used for, and we are not surprising them with anything which is not acceptable by them. Acceptance come with slowly. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Srija. That's a great story, because actually it's very relevant to the accountability, the acceptability aspect of the human rights. And if people are not prepared to use the facilities because they don't appreciate what it really means, then it defeats the purpose. So can I pass back to Gabi now to go to the next stage of the checklist? Thank you, Srija.
Yes. Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, now the last two normative criteria are accessibility. So water and sanitation services must be accessible to everyone in the household or its vicinity, including healthcare facilities and other public institutions. Physical security must not be threatened during access to facilities, and the distance travel needs to be maximum 1 kilometer or no more than 30 minutes round trip. And questions that you could ask for this criteria are, do we have a system in place to reach out to groups with special needs, such as those with physical disabilities? And am I including remote communities among my clients? And examples for implementation are deliver the water to remote communities by truck, for example, or via decentralized kiosks, and install specially designed facilities for people with particular needs, for example, ramps or handrails. And lastly, we have affordability, which means that access to water and sanitation facilities and services must be done at a price that is affordable to all. The United Nations Development Program, UNDP, proposes that household spending on water sanitation does not exceed 3% of family income. So what you could ask for this one is, am I able to offer water at reduced prices for the marginalized, poor, most vulnerable members of the communities where I supply, for example, orphans or homeless? And do I set prices based on what families can afford versus based only on individuals? Sorry. And an example could be consult with the local community and with your clients to be able, you're setting affordable prices for water, and request subsidies for the state to sell water at a more affordable price to the marginalized and vulnerable communities. Now we'll have more examples from our panelists.
Thanks, Gabby. I'd like to go to Farhana Rashid, who runs an organization called Bumijo in Bangladesh, who has an example on affordability from our workshop last week. Can you explain, Farhana, how you work to try and make services affordable for marginalized people and some of the challenges that you face to do this? Farhana. Hello, Farhana?
Yes, hello.
Hello, can you hear me? Would you like to answer the question?
No, sorry, I just had internet trouble.
Oh, okay. So the question is, can you explain how you work to try and make services affordable for marginalized people and some of the challenges you face in doing this?
So thank you, Amanda, and hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So it's like I couldn't share my screen right now because I am from my phone, but I would share our experience, how we wanted to make our toilets affordable. Basically, we are based in Bangladesh. We are trying to build and most importantly, operate public toilets. And our aim is to make it, to provide the service and at the same time to make it business-wise sustainable. So what we have to do, like, most of the people think like toilet should be free, but the quality we are trying to ensure, it even doesn't cover the cost. I mean, the fee that we are collecting from them. So we try to bundle up with different, in different ways, like we have subscribed user, we have paper user. So we try to, I mean, the people who are marginalized, who have to use it several times in a day, who are mostly from the community or from the low income segment. So we give them some reduced amount of rate rather than the paper user. We are trying to cover that from the paper usage. And also at the same time, we are trying to incorporate some other revenues streams by incorporating selling different products and also advertisement. But you know, as we have discussed in our previous workshop, like we have some difficulties. I mean, we don't have much policy regulation on that. I mean, our policy doesn't allow us to pay the water and electricity bill in lower range. because most of the public toilets here in Bangladesh, they are situated in a place, it's mostly in the commercial place. So we have to pay them at commercial rate. So which is a very, it's a large amount of it. So we have to negotiate with the government. At the same time, we have to work with the affordability of the people who are paying. And also as a challenge, I can mention, like we are very much willing to impact more people's life, but our policies doesn't allow us sometimes to put some sales product and also some advertisement, because the policies, I mean, this area has been got attention from government side policymakers, but I think it will require few more years to make it, to incorporate all those systems. So this was from my side. So if anyone has any question, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you, Rahana. It's very interesting to hear some of the challenges that you're facing, and we can maybe bring that out in the Q&A session later on. So I'll pass back to Gabriela for the last part of the checklist, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Now we're just going to run through the human rights-based approach, so the principles, starting with non-discrimination. Water and sanitation facilities must be available to all on a non-discriminatory basis, and priority must be given to the most marginalized and vulnerable people. So a few questions you could ask are, do I ensure that people with disabilities, marginalized, and in need have access to the services that I'm distributing? Do I employ in my organization people from different backgrounds, different genders, race, color, age, disability, etc.? And examples for implementation could be investigate with the help of local partners whether any segments of the community are excluded from buying your services due to social origins or marginalization, and make sure that you don't ask unrequired information that could be discriminatory, for example, asking for birth certificates or property title. Next, we have access to information, and this includes the right to seek, receive, and impart information concerning water issues and sanitation. So you could ask, am I communicating clearly to all potential clients about quantity, quality, price of water that I'm selling, and any other information that may be relevant for your clients? And do my clients have the possibility to request further information about the business? Examples for implementation could be adapt your communication to the capacities and special circumstances of the client. For example, including indigenous or minority languages, verbal or pictograms rather than written announcements in case of illiteracy in your community, and provide an information board with essential information on quality, opening hours, price, and grievance mechanisms. In terms of participation, it's a process related to planning, design, construction, maintenance, and monitoring of sanitation and water services that should be participatory. This requires genuine opportunity to freely express the needs and concerns and influence decisions. So you could ask, does the local community have a role in the development of the business? Do clients participate in the decisions that affect their access to water and sanitation at the community or river basin level? And is participation also possible for marginalized and vulnerable people, including people with disabilities, the use of appropriate languages at meetings, and local accessibility? So you could, for example, have suggestion box available for the clients, local authorities, and communities. and involve members of the local community in monitoring access to water and sanitation. And for accountability, the realization of the human rights requires responsible and accountable institutions, a clear designation of responsibilities, and coordination between different entities involved. Here you could ask, are my complaint mechanisms available for the public and easy to access? And do I make the complaint mechanism easy to use for those with incapacities such as illiteracy or any other language barrier? And in terms of example for implementation, you could establish grievance mechanisms that allow your clients to complain, such that you can respond to the complaints and concerns of the customers, and make sure that this complaint mechanism is accessible. And for the last one, we have sustainability, which means that the human rights obligations related to water and sanitation have to be met in a sustainable manner. This means practices have to be financial, environmentally, and socially sustainable so that future generations can enjoy these rights too. You could ask if there is have access to the sustainability of my business, including identification of possible internal and external risks to the following areas: economic, social, and environmental aspects. Do I have any process or checks in place to make sure that I don't run out of water supply, for example? And for implementation, you should make sure that you avoid water source contamination and source over abstraction, and consider the local circumstances, such as changing water availability and variability when providing your services. Now I'll pass back to Amanda so we can have more examples from the panel.
Thank you, Gabby. And that concludes the presentation on the checklist. There is another section there on business responsibilities, but that will be too much to cover today. So on non-discrimination, I'd like to ask a question of Prakash Amatia, who runs Erosan in Nepal, which is a microfinancing organization. So Prakash, could you describe the system of prioritizing vulnerable groups that you use in your organization? I remember last week you were talking about how you reduce waiting times for certain priority groups. You're on mute. Prakash, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Thank you for this opportunity, and very warm greetings to everybody. I'm Prakash Amate, working as a country representative in Erosan in Nepal. Actually, our business model is a three-pronged approach. So we are based in Canada as a Erosan Canada, and it's a non-profit organization, non-government non-profit organization. And then in Nepal, we are registered as a for-profit social enterprise. And we have an arm of the women's group. So this women's group is comprised of the sanitation workers who has been in the business from generation to generation in sanitation work, like sweeping, cleaning, and toilet cleaning, and all these kind of like that we call it dirty jobs. So what we found when we started our business in Kathmandu in Nepal with the public toilet is that they are very much discriminated in terms of employment opportunities. So there is a high prevalence of the bidding process of running this kind of like sanitation utility. Though in our constitution in Nepal, it's mentioned that it's a fundamental right. Sanitation is a fundamental right. And then the sanitation services is a responsibility of the local government. We have a federal governance structure now in Nepal. So, but in reality, it's a very different. So in our surveys, what we discovered is like some contractors got these kind of like facilities from the municipalities or government or some kind of like government institution. And even the kind of like the development partners, they built these kind of like very fancy infrastructure, but at the end, it goes into the hands of the contractor through the bidding process. And the employment goes to these kind of the marginalized and very vulnerable sector, and who has been in the services from generation to generation, especially the youth, women groups. They don't have any choice. And their salaries and benefits and all the things are very, very scrutinized in a way that, I mean, their livelihood is very difficult to maintain. So what we did to resolve this thing is like we evolved as a kind of like social enterprise, and we partner with the municipalities, and we are in a kind of like public-private partnership modality. So the government provides us land and some contribution on the infrastructure, and we have some grant like Grand Challenge Canada, Stone Family Foundation. So some of these supporting agencies provided some infrastructure cost. But then like the capex is made through the grant and donations and some investments, even the bank CSR funding. But then like the operation costs, which is very, very crucial. So my previous speakers also mentioned about these things like water quality, recycling. So our toilet models are based on the nucleus of women and water. So because the water is the essential, because it's an Asian culture that, I mean, water is a must to clean. So so then like, I mean, we reuse, recycle, and we use rainwater for the water need. And whereas these toilet facilities, these public toilet facilities are maintained by the these marginalized sanitation women's group, and they have formed this cooperative, and they have saving and credit as well. So they have now, they work in a kind of like very professional. So they are trained, they are highly skilled, and they deliver a kind of like, so we're trying to come up with a kind of like sanitation, public sanitation hospitality. It's kind of like housekeeping for hotel industries, no? So they work in a shift basis with nice uniform. So the transformation now is like they have a very decent salary as set by the government, not below that. And they have medical insurance and leave facilities, maternity facilities, and also the kind of like the health insurances. And on top of that, uniform and these kind of like the occupational health and safety regulations are there in place. So this is how it has empowered these women's group, and they are taking over these kind of like public utilities, and the responses from the clients is so much overwhelming that, I mean, even the user fee like 5 and 10 rupee, they give them like more than what it is to be paid. So for P, we charge 5, and for POO, we charge 10. But sometimes they get like 50 rupees and 100 rupees as well as a token, as an appreciation. So this is the changing process. So what we have learned from this for-profit business intervention is like, yes, it was also kind of like, I mean, the business as it is like taking the contract and delivering the services, but the clients never get, even they pay. So, but now the transformation is like putting the right people in the right place with the right training, and their rights are ensured. So the services are more efficient and more welcoming than before, and then their rights are also kind of like, I mean, respected, and now they feel like they have a very dignified profession. So this is where the transformation is, and our motto is like, I mean, these public toilets are run by the women for the women. So the woman is in the very nucleus, and water is the very key part, and as we know, naturally, women are the best water engineers. So they know how to efficiently use the water, so and how to conserve the water. But we have infrastructures in place. Thank you very much. If I don't know, I mean, whether I
You could
answer your
talk all
question
day. It's
properly.
very interesting, Prakash. Thank you. And
Yeah.
that was from the perspective of the workers rather than the customers, but actually also incredibly important. So I think on that note, we'll pass over to Pedro for his comments at this point. And then after that, we have got time for us to have a discussion about some of the points that have come up and maybe ask some specific questions about your presentations as well.
Yeah,
But
thank
I'd
you,
like
Amanda.
to-
But yeah, last not the least, but what
Yes.
I'm trying to say is like, because of these kind of like intervention from the operators side, the side where the operators, the vulnerable group of the certain community bringing into the business, I mean, it's changing the lives of the women clients, no? And the disabilities and even the
Very
transgenders and LBGTs. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Very important. Okay, lovely. On that positive note, and let's pass over to Pedro for his presentation, and then we can continue the conversation for the rest of the time. We should have plenty of time. So Pedro, would you like to tell us what you're thinking? Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Excuse me, Donald. Yes, I'm not mute. Okay. I was saying yes, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. And well, as well known as you have explained already, different of you. Well, the human rights to water and sanitation entitle everyone, as you well know, to have access to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible and affordable water for personal and domestic use. Well, and regarding sanitation, safe, hygienic, culturally acceptable, secure, and ensuring privacy and dignity. But I used to insist, and you know very well, a human rights-based approach also requires participatory, accountable, and non-discriminatory management, so that I call usually democratic governance on water and sanitation. Just in order to clarify that this is very special. This is not required, for example, in other services, public services, such as air transport, for instance. Well, human rights are rights, as I said, to which everyone is entitled. They are not just client rights, strictly conditional on payments, but include us human beings, those who have difficulty in paying because of poverty and vulnerability. States have the obligation to respect and to ensure respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights. However, commercial companies and other suppliers, operators, must comply with all applicable laws inside the country in question, which should include respecting human rights, including the right to save, in concrete, the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. I find it interesting to outline the challenges that human rights to water identifies, considering the human rights-based approach in the water sector. Issues that, of course, companies need to take into account. Companies and also, of course, the public sector too. I read directly this question: ensuring transparent and democratic decision making. Very important. Addressing power asymmetries in the bidding and negotiation process. Not easy to do it. Reaching the poorest and most marginalized, as you are explaining also and assuming. Ensure affordable services. Avoid disconnection in case of inability to pay. I'm insisting on this worldwide. We got it with the pandemic, but as a need because of being effective with the virus, in the fight against the virus. But we need to transform this need into a permanent virtue, on accomplishing the human rights, fulfilling the human rights. Ensure quality of services, ensure monitoring and follow-up, ensure an effective complaints mechanism addressing corruption. With respect to this question, it is important to note that all the corruption is, of course, takes place in the public administration. It is foiled by private interests. That is, corruption problems imply responsibility of the corrupt in the administration, but also on the corruptors in the private business spheres. Well, the late special representative of the Secretary General on the issue of human rights and transnational corporations and other business enterprise, Mr. John Ruggie, is remembered with respect and appreciation for his work, and left us with clear references to it in his report to the UN General Assembly, which I recommend should be considered. As he said, based on more than 300 reports on business-related human rights abuses, one conclusion is clear. There are few, if any, internationally recognized rights that companies cannot influence. So this is very important. Also, the former, my predecessor, Leo Heller, in his report 1 year ago, identified different risks, including the lack of usage of maximum of available resources, the deterioration of services, unaffordable access, the neglect of sustainability, as well as the lack of accountability and inequality. Well, the most notable international instruments that aligns private participation with the human rights standards is the guiding principles on business and human rights of the United Nations. It notes that states must protect against human rights abuse within their territory and or jurisdiction by third parties, including, of course, business enterprise, through the provision of effective policies, legislation, regulation, and applications. Ultimately, the obligations from a strictly legal point of view belong to the states, but private sectors, private actors, as well as also public managers at local, regional level, have a responsibility for the services they manage, in particular with regard to the human rights at stake. It is difficult to specify these responsibilities at the international level in the form of legal obligations that are strictly enforceable in court. But moral obligations must be transformed into effective obligations. In this regard, states have the final say and the key responsibilities to ensure that I call democratic water governance based on human rights. I insist on the need to promote unethical reflections, most of you already know, on water and sanitation management, but a reflection that must be projected in effective regulations and not simply in proposals for good practices. This is one of the main challenges I want to work on as a rapporteur. And I'm learning from the experiences you are exposing, the different persons that are participating. To me, it's very, very interesting to learn about these concrete experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. That was a nice overview, and I think it sets the scene for us to have more of a discussion around this. I know several of the panelists have some specific questions for you, and maybe that would be a place to start. So we also have 1 or 2 questions in the chat box and in the Q&A, which we won't be able to get to. But I think, given what we've heard from the panelists and Pedro's presentation, would Neil, I know you had a specific question for Pedro on this. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you. There's a bit of a statement and a question. Pedro, I was very interested in what you said at the end, particularly, which I agree, which is that we don't just need good, proposals on good practice, we actually need proper regulation. I think what we've heard in some of these presentations is that that's still lacking in many cases, and I can't see governments and public authorities working anytime quickly to fix the huge gap in regulation that we need. For Hana's example of where the rules are almost working against the progression of getting the service delivered, not being able to, the punitive rates and not being able to advertise, give you some idea of the kind of examples that businesses face. But I think, Pedro, in the interim, what I think the business community needs is that we need certainty and to know what kind of rules work. So in the interim, what I'm trying to say is that we do need tools like this checklist. This is, in some cases, all businesses have in some countries, because there's an abject lack of regulation. And I just wanted to know what you say on that, because I know you're absolutely right. You're saying, we've got to deliver the human right, but there is an interim period of trying to make that happen. And I think as business, we really just want to move the debate on from constantly being reminded about, you've got to fulfill the rights. So we know that, we really do know that, we get it just like everyone else does. And I think it's now about what kind of tools we should be following to try and make that happen. Sorry, that's a very long statement and long question, but I think hopefully I got to the question at the end, Pedro.
That's okay. Pedro, would you like to address that?
Yes, this is evident. We need clear regulation for everybody, also for the public sector. So what happens in a municipality where they have no the means for accomplishing, for fulfilling the human rights, the same if it is a public or a private operator, we need clear rules and clear regulations, of course. But sometimes, so I agree with you. And if we are able to clarify this, the states are able to clarify all of this, this is good for everybody. And in particular for the private sector that try to build a legitimate business on this kind of services. The problem is when the interest for the benefit as a business go against the general interest, and there is no enough capacity in the public sector, sometimes at local level, for developing the citizen participation, the control, political and social restrictions that, of course, if we have better regulations, it will be better for managing this kind of problems, practical problems, for making real, for making feasible the accountability, the public participation, the transparency, because when we are dealing with business, generally transparency is for the owners, so not for the clients. So it's not easy, but of course that depends on the responsibility of the public sector, of the institutions, the governments, and of course also at the international level.
So,
Pedro, sorry, Amanda, just to answer that, Pedro, I think that you've seen examples today where businesses are not just thinking about transparency to their owners. And I think the businesses today, and towards there are hundreds and thousands of businesses like this trying to do the right thing, that are actually telling you and the community that transparency and openness, and we had that example from Srija, are actually good for business. And I think it's a comment that Amanda made at the beginning. I find it difficult to this just general assumption from some that businesses are automatically secretive and that it's in their interest to not be open. I just don't think that's true. But anyway, Chriselle's got a hand up, Amanda, so I'll be quiet.
It's very difficult to generalize on any of this stuff. I think we've just got to try and move things forward. And the question is, what's the best way of doing that, I suppose. I want to call on some of the examples we've had, like Christelle from the Philippines. I know you sound as if you've got a lot of good systems in place, but to what extent has that been supported by regulations in your country? Have they been supportive there?
the regulator is present. I wouldn't say that they're perfect and perfectly supportive, right? But maybe 80% or 85%, you can count on their presence to, well, to ensure what needs to be ensured. But what I wanted to ask Pedro actually was if he believes that individuals and organizations can be self-regulating, right? I personally believe that as a society and a community, we can be self-regulating. And this kind of checklist that the UN has published or is publishing right now, as Neil mentioned, is very helpful. It's very helpful. You know, Neil asked me to answer the checklist, even if we are already a professional organization. And even if we are already practicing those things, there were some new ideas that I got from the checklist, right? And if I want to implement that in the organization, that is not something the regulator is asking me to do. It is something that on a personal level would be interesting for us to do and ask our managers to read the checklist as well, right? To widen their understanding of the human rights of water, which is exactly what I did. After Neil sent me the checklist, I emailed it to all of them and I said, answer this checklist, find out if all of our areas are complying. So I believe that regulation or not, if people are very interested and have the willpower to make progress in water and sanitation, they will do so on their own without regulation. And yes, this checklist that you've provided is a good way to help someone or in a country where regulation is poor, have no guidance on mentors and other water experts, sanitation experts. This is very helpful.
Pedro, would you like to answer that question?
Yes.
The question was whether or not businesses can be self-regulating.
Yes,
Not businesses, people in general or organizations, not necessarily just business.
Yeah, okay.
Everybody.
very short. This is very valuable, even not just collectively with movements or groups and so on, but even personal goodwill and good practices to recommend, such as even charity, even from a religious point of view, an ethical point of view, are very interesting. But just, I say, is not enough, is not sufficient. We need to make this not just because it's good or because of my way of thinking, but because it's an obligation. It's an obligation in the society, it's a rule, it's a law, is a concrete way of behavior that we manage democratically for according it and for developing it. This is why I think I'm pro personal goodwill, collective goodwill, good practices recommendation. This is very nice, but we have to find, you have to try to get good laws, good obligations, democratically assumed.
Actually, I mean, clearly that ideally we want to have a regulatory system that's enabling in that respect. And I suppose where we're coming from with this checklist is to help individual organizations, businesses to take it on themselves in the absence of that. But I actually have a question here from Alex. Alex, you have a question that you wanted to ask that's turning the tables the other way around to say how can regulation foster innovation? And I wonder if you want to just expand on that a little bit, Pedro.
Yeah, certainly. And thank you, Pedro, for your remarks. You know, we work with AREM and Bumijo and Aerosan and a number of other service providers that are small and growing social businesses, very purpose-driven businesses. And, you know, what we've seen both in the investment sphere, but also in their government and relationships with municipalities is how sometimes regulation can cut off innovation or innovative approaches that they're bringing to the table. So many of these innovators were thinking about climate and resource management and circular economy purposes long before regulation dare approached that, and were actually cut out, or it stalled their growth because their solutions were sort of too innovative. I would love to hear your thoughts or perspectives on how we can further and advance regulation that is inclusive to innovation and inclusive to all sizes of the private sector, whether they be large utilities or small and growing vibrant businesses like we've heard from today.
If I could just interrupt on that and suggest innovation that is human rights based as well. Thank you.
Well, for me, a good regulation doesn't tie the initiative or to improve. Usually regulations are must guarantee the basic elements and give freedom for innovation and for advancing in the objectives, in the goals, in this case of human rights. So I think, of course, we can make also regulations, stupid regulations, bureaucratic, that instead of opening the public participation, when you talk about public participation and effective transparency, we are talking about innovation. The people want to participate not for making all the time the same things, but for make it better, for build better. So a good rule, a good framework, regulation framework must be open for this participation, for improving, for making better. So I think there is no contradiction. Of course, we can have bad regulations. I don't talk about regulation in general. I talk about good regulations.
If I could bring us back to the checklist potentially, and Christelle very kindly mentioned that it had given her some ideas of areas of improvement and that they're looking at what they can do as a result. I wondered if I could open the question to the other panelists, I can't say your name very clearly, sorry, Srija, Farjana and Prakash, to say, what did you find in the checklist that made you think there's an area that you could be doing better, that you hadn't thought about, that actually you could be more compliant with human rights as a result of reading through the questions in the checklist? Be quite interested to hear that. Would anyone like to go first?
May I?
Yes, please. Prakash.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Actually, while I was listening, I mean, the very pertinent issue, or kind of like, I mean, the debate is going around is like, I mean, as a business, no, as a business, it has to survive on its own, right? And in this utility, which is a basic human right, sanitation and whatnot. So in relation to the public toilet services that which we are operating as a social business, and respecting the human rights, we are operating in such an environment where we don't have any regulations. So in absence of regulations, no, and the innovations and the practices and the models that we are bringing in to serve the larger vulnerable communities with their sanitation need is always been appreciated by the local government and the central government and development partners. But there is serious lacking of the investment. So in our case, what happened is like we had some opportunity to bringing in investment from abroad, and we have to pay 25% tax. So how we can ensure the right approach and this kind of like sustainability, the financial sustainability and the operating costs management. So this is very contradicting. So as per your questions, going through the checklist, we don't have any issue as a business, because we would love to provide and follow these kind of like structured commitments, because we are also one of the customer, we are also one of the clients of these services. So it's not a kind of like that we deliver and we forget. So the most challenging part that our governments need to address to promote this kind of like utility operations is like, in the past, it has been the kind of like portfolio or the responsibility of the local government or some kind of like government institutions, which was not successful and it failed. So now the businesses, the enterprise is coming up with new ideas and innovations, and more importantly, the climate resilient approaches like recycling, biodigester, water conservation, and with a focus to empowering and creating job opportunities for the women and vulnerable communities. But then, like, what is the incentive? So I think the bigger piece is for the social businesses like us is what is the incentive to continue to do this. Otherwise, what it will happen is like it will just become a kind of like a showcase, and Toilet Board Coalition will pick us up as one of the very good initiative, and after a year they will also forget us. So how to sustain and continue and then retain these kind of like good initiatives on a longer term, supported by the state or some development partners as well, because we work closely with the community.
I think you make a very good point that we're preaching a little bit to the converted, particularly in your case, where you're coming from an area where you really want to do all the right things. But actually, from a constructive point of view, what could we do with this? Because the checklist could actually be used as a basis for discussion with the government to see, or with your regulatory authorities, to see what could be introduced that would be more enabling for your businesses to operate. And maybe that's something we could follow up with you to see if there is a chance of using it in a constructive way. Because I think there needs to be, it isn't just a one-way street. I know we're looking at it from that point of view with this checklist. It's designed to help small businesses or small operators to be more human rights based in the absence of a regulatory framework that helps them. But actually, we also need to work from the top down as well to help change that environment.
If I be add with that,
Srija, yes.
Yeah. So acceptability for any new innovation, it takes time. That's what we have found. But if we have someone who can authenticate that, then who can give more value addition, who can say that yes, this is good, if we have the support of government or any independent bodies who can say this is a good model which can be replicated elsewhere. So with that authentication, we can implement all this innovation and bring more eco-friendly and sustainable products, especially in a field like sanitation. People are more hesitant to try out new models, and so that's where we have found, because they can't be wrong in that, because if you see the case of recycled water, it takes time. It takes they want to believe it after seeing a lot of results and a lot of confirmation from us. Yeah, that is.
I think that's a very good point to make, is that change like that does take a long time, and I don't think people appreciate it, especially if you're starting a new business. It's almost overwhelming. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the checklist though, was there anything there that you thought, oh, we could be doing that? For example, being more inclusive in some way, or communication, or were there any little pieces that it made you feel that
makes sense for us? Yes, for us it makes sense. Yeah, communication is very key here. That is there, and that's put in the questionnaire also, survey.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Farhana, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I would also echo with Srija and Prakash that what they have said, but I have seen it in a way like we all are here doing a great job, or we have chosen a path to serve more people. And we also work with one of the non-glamorous thing in the world. So, we have something in our mind. We know we are working for human rights, but this sort of checklist always help us to balance ourselves. So business and human rights, where we are standing. If it's in anything, it's going up or down or those sort of things. I would like to see in that lens. And whenever those sort of things are here, we can check, okay, so we are aligned. We can proudly say, we have put yes, 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 or tick mark there. So we might feel proud. And whenever we fall down, we don't have policy regulations, or we have some sort of thing like that can pull us off. So that really helps us and elevate us, at least give us courage to move forward. And also those sort of, checklists help us to talk to our government policymakers and people, like, see that needs to be done. And to reach this, we need these modification. And it will take time, as you just say. So I think within few years, we have been able to achieve few more things. We can sit on the same table. They will listen to us, and we will also try to incorporate those things in a right manner. So that's it from my side.
We have so we have a few questions in the chat. I have to say a lot of them are not specifically around human rights points, but we would love to engage with you after the webinar on some of the specific issues. And what I will do is share the chat with the panelists so that we can follow up on some of the specific questions that have been asked. But I think while we've got Pedro here, it would be good to use this time to have further questions around systems and ideas of how we can. Oh, sorry about that. There's feedback coming through from somewhere. So Pedro, do you have anything you would like to ask any of the panelists at this point?
I would like to underline some things, because in a moment, I don't remember if it was Prakash or Srija, I don't know, have raised the question, we have now enough or good environmental regulation. And this is very important to me, because I used to say, in general, in a general context, when we talk about the global water crisis, remembering that 2.2 billion people have no access guaranteed to safe drinking water, I used to say, these are not properly thirsty people without water around them. No, they are generally the vast majority very impoverished people living next to a polluted river, a polluted aquifer. So it will be impossible, nearly impossible, to fulfill really the human rights to these 2.2 billion people if we don't make peace with our rivers, with our aquifers, if we don't recover the health of the nature around the people, because this is the water they need every day. We cannot build, I used to say as economist, is the most cost-effective alternative is to recover the health of nature around us, the health of aquatic ecosystem is a cost-effective. And we are talking about people who cannot afford for many of the things we want to do. So in this sense, this is the first very important thing. And the second one I want to underline, and I'm talking all the time to the governments, the time I'm a special rapporteur, I used to say states have an obligation and a responsibility with respect to human rights, but that includes priority funding. It's not something that is my responsibility, but is not my priority. That doesn't make sense. So in 2008, I remember, the strategy of austerity, the so-called austerity strategy, came into force, and there were no funds, public funds, for the main basic things. It is not austerity, by the way. Austerity is to avoid things that are not necessary, but not basic needs. But okay, it was in this, the fact. So when we talk in that context of financial gap, there is no financial means from the public sector for accomplishing the public responsibility on the question. Well, it was so. But at present, we have confronted, we have the experience of the pandemic, and the confrontation with the pandemic has been a public effort mainly. And there was no another way. And even the post-pandemic effort for relaunching the social economy in all the country, in all the world, with the Green New Deal and so on. Also, of course, there will be private efforts too, but mainly is a public effort, and we have funds now. So the problem is the governments and the global institutions as the World Bank have the priority of devoting a significant part of these available public funds for financing the needs at local level all over the world. It is a real priority or not, but it is a political choice. It is a decision that we have to take now. So from my point of view, we are in front of this challenge. And of course, if there is the public funds in priority for the basic issues as this one, of course, then we can discuss how to manage this question and what is the role of private sector, big companies or not so big. But the main issue is the same as for facing the challenge of public health. We need to reinforce the public health systems around the world. Water and sanitation is a cornerstone of public health. So we need that states and public institutions worldwide make the priority with respect to financing, with a special attention to local and community authorities to receive the means for dealing with the responsibilities of this question.
Well, I have to say that was very that was very compelling. I feel in both of your points, one regarding the pollution of our rivers as the starting point, and I think businesses also have a role to play in not releasing wastewater and helping to clean our ecosystems, and that responsibility is clear. But the state obligation to give priority funding, well, I think that's come up in some of our statements from our panelists today too. There isn't the financial help to support them to be human rights based, and that's where things are falling down. I think we're getting to the end of our session now, and I feel a bit sad after that lovely last speech to open the floor again, but I'd like everybody to have a minute to just say their final comments. And then Pedro, maybe you can say a last goodbye at the end as well. So if I can run through the order I have on my screen, I have Neil, would you like to just say a minute? That's it. Just the kind of final comments on what your feelings are.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I'll be less than a minute. I think, Pedro, no one would disagree with what you just said at all. It's absolutely right about the public and so the political will to sort these problems with public funds. But we could be arguing about this we could be calling for this for another 30 years. Yeah, we don't have time, because in 30 years time, I think the earth will be so destroyed that, certainly for my kids, there's no future for them. I want action now. And so while you absolutely right, a special rapporteur are saying to governments, get your act together, act. At the same time, businesses, as you've heard today, are trying as best they can in their own small way to try and make a difference, while this huge debate goes on up in the clouds somewhere about whether governments are going to act or not, and et cetera, et cetera. What we want from you, Pedro, and people like you, a special rapporteur, is, okay, in many reports, and your predecessor has highlighted risks of businesses operating in water and sanitation. Great, risks are highlighted. We all know the risks. Now, what do you think are the ways to go. We need that interim level of kind of guidance to business to say, you know what, a special rapporteur, I think you should be thinking about X, Y, and Z, this checklist, that tool, those things are important. That's what we require from you. It's always like problems, risks. And this is not just at you, Pedro, so I'm not personalizing it at all. This is endemic in the whole sector the whole time. It's problems. Whereas the businesses you have here are trying their best to offer solutions. And we need more kind of encouragement and guidance from you on what you think is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Farhana, you're second on the row. Do you have one last comment? 1 minute.
Yeah, just I would also echo with what Neil said, like for policy changes, to onboard the policymakers or the decision makers, and especially for the country like us, it requires time. But as interim solution, we need support, we need voices, and we need people. So that's it from my end. I want to do good business. I want to serve more people. I will be able to do with my people, with my team, if all those things are in place. So thank you.
Rija.
Yeah, I want to add to what Pedro had told. We are fast losing our resources, which are very precious. In India, 1.7 million tons of fecal waste untreated is, per day is dumped into all these water bodies. It's a huge number. And if we don't do anything fast, we will have all our, water bodies drying out and not usable. And technologies and innovations such as, which is promoting, treatments and which is bringing best solutions in this, aspect, they should be encouraged, and proper regulations and best practices, benchmarks should be set where, people can compare and implement such eco-friendly products. That's what I wish for, and public is definitely very aware now. Post pandemic, everyone is aware. Everyone wants to be eco-friendly. Everyone wants to, have solutions which are environment friendly and to live with the earth as such. So thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed here. Thank you.
Great, Srisha. Thank you. Prakash, you're the next one.
Oh, thank you. I was not expecting, thank you, Amanda, but I have very important thing to present and express that as Neil said, we don't have time. And I am not a kind of like a business person that is interested doing this kind of like business. I am a toiletpreneur. I was an advocate. I was a policy researcher. So this is kind of like, the situation that brought me into this business, the toilet business, no? So this is a dirty job, danger job, and society doesn't accept me as a toilet owner or a toilet promoter. But then why I'm doing this is for the social welfare. But then where is our government? Our government, yes, there is a political commitment because our mayor own his tenure because he has in his political manifesto that he will provide the smart toilet. And our municipalities, every year they have we build one smart toilet per ward, but it doesn't materialize. And with the statement that there is a public funding, yes, there is public funding, but the system is very, very corrupt. So the infrastructures built are very corrupt. There is no management. And I said, there is no guideline and no regulation and no law how it should be operated and managed. So where are these? Who will ask these things? So the voters, they don't have voice. They have voice only when the election is there. So after the election is nowhere. So that's why. So these private, how to attract the private investors? Because we are not trusted by our banks. We are not eligible to get the loans. We are ready to get the loan and bring the investment, but it's not eligible. So this is the very crucial thing. So the right thing, the fundamental right and the right to water and sanitation is very, very crucial, with its price to the environment and our generation. But then how to articulate these things, and we want it now. We don't have time to wait. So I differ with my colleague. Srija, that I mean, this is something new and we have to wait and it will materialize. No, it's not a trading business. It's a public health business. It's a because if you stop, I mean, if someone stops you to pee, then what will happen in your physiology? We can understand that thing. So sanitation, you cannot ask to wait. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prakash. Alex.
Yes, just wanted to echo Neil's comments and really encourage the audience and everyone wherever possible to encourage governments to engage with their local private sector and the utilities and service providers like we have on this call. You know, and then secondly, to develop and promote skills building and for solution providers and tools like this checklist. I do think we're on to something here, and we need to scale tools like this across service and solution providers. So that's it.
Thank you, Alex. Christelle, I think you're our last one before we go back to Pedro. Thank you.
I know this sounds cliche, but at the end of the day, it just takes each individual to make a difference in the world. And the key is empowerment. Prakash said it earlier. This segment of society was highly discriminated, but then they were able to raise them up, make them more reputable, and that empowered them. So I believe the answer is being able to empower more people through our own influence. I don't like to trust the government, honestly. I really rather do things by myself and with the people whom I can influence. And so the key is empowerment. And for everyone who's also in this call, I also want to promote the checklist for water and sanitation. Believe me, coming from a professional organization, it's a good one. It's a good one. So it is a good guide in the absence of regulators. Be self-regulating, empower yourself, and using this checklist is a good start. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today.
Oh, thank you, Christelle, and I appreciate your comments. You've saved me from needing to say any more about it. I would like, thank you. I'll pass it over to Pedro and then we'll wrap up for the day. Just last minute, Pedro.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I want to say the experience of the pandemic provides us at present with lessons and an awareness of our vulnerability, for instance, that is forcing us to change many approaches and in a very short time now. Things that were said 2 years ago, were just something impossible to do, perhaps, and now begins to be necessary. So in that sense, in general, I talk for a moment in general, as you said at the beginning, in that sense, I am ambitious, and I think we must be ambitious in the moment we are living. We must be ambitious, of course, in the fight against things so powerful as corruption. It's not good to say, no, there is corruption, it is unavoidable, so I try to do something in my space in order to be not corrupt here. No, of course, we do this at local level and we fight against corruption, of course, and against non-compliance with international human rights obligations of the states and of the private sectors and so on. And in the meantime, of course, in the way, good practices should always be known, encouraged, and supported, be they public, private, or community-based approach. For instance, I am focused and present in community-based approach because next year, my 2 reports will focus on human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation in indigenous peoples and in impoverished rural communities. So community-based approach is basic, is essential. Is it public? For me, is democratic water governance. It is the good way to go ahead. It's not the best way for the future. No, it's the best way we can do at present the things in this part, in another part. And the same with the cases we have explained. This is why I'm here, because it's a good approach in this sense to have good references at local level and in order to be practiced from the first moment, from right now. No? But I insist, I think we are in a moment, in a key moment in the history, a change of era probably, and things that 10 years ago was impossible even to defend, like for instance, to have public funds in priority for these kind of things, now are in discussion. And are in discussion because we need this kind of new attitudes, new approaches, new political approaches. So I think you can count on me for the basic examples and practices that you explained. Very good, I am with you. And at the same time, I will continue to fight in the general context in which we have to assume challenges, very important, historically important at the moment.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And that is a lovely note to finish on. And I'd like to say thank you to everybody else, to Chriselle, to Srija, Tajana, Prakash, to Neil, to Alex, to Gabby for giving us their presentation at the beginning. And thank you to everybody for listening to today. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.